All right. All right, good morning. Let's start with the Heart Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem, thus they are here at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling in Masha's vast mountain in Rajgiri together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in concentration in the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasatva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasatva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasatva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage, daughter of the lineage, who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom, should look upon like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness without characteristics. Unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition of factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element in soul, not to including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. And there is no ignorance, no extension of ignorance, and so on up to including no aging and death, no extension of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on dwell in the perfection of wisdom. The mind without obscuration, without fear, having completely passed beyond error to reach the aim point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment and reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhisattva. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the fine perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan involves in that concentration, committed the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated, even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Bodhisattva Vadiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. I prostrated the gathering of the kinis in the three chakras to divine and holy yoga fusing space. By a path of clairvoyance and magical illumination, looked after practitioners like a mother and her child. Akasamara Sashadara Samarayate. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhisattva. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified, Shintum Koriya Soha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. May there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here and right now. Sashia Pokia Joshim Tamri Rabinshi Nidege Padi Sangye Shindu Mikte Owa Gihiljokunanda Shinla Chopal Shoidam Guru Ratnamandala Kaliyatayani Chodan Sogi Chonam La Chanchu Badu Dami Jasuchi Dagi Chinagi Betsonangi Drola Benche Sange Dropasho Chodan Sogi Chonam La Chanchu Badu Dami Jasuchi Dagi Chushegi Betsonangi Drola Benche Sange Dropasho Chodan Sogi Chonam La Chanchu Badu Dami Jasuchi Dagi Chushegi Betsonangi Drola Benche Sange Dropasho. So we're just going to go ahead with the reading of the text. We're going to pick up from the point that we left off yesterday in the presentation of the mind-only school. So we have been looking at the presentation of the way of asserting object possessors. We start to look at the presentation of awarenesses. Now, let's pick up from this paragraph. A direct perceiver is not necessarily a direct valid cognizer because although there exists a mental direct perceiver apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being, there does not exist a mental direct valid cognizer apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being. A self-knower experiencing a mental direct perceiver apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being and the second moment of a sense direct perceiver apprehending form are non-valid cognizers. No. It says here, a direct perceiver is not necessarily a direct valid cognizer because although there exists a mental direct perceiver apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being, there does not exist a mental direct valid cognizer apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being. So there's a point that this section is making. So we have a mental perception apprehending form, and it exists in the mind stream of an ordinary being. And that mental perception apprehending form is stated here to be not a valid cognizer. So we need to think of why is it not a valid cognizer? Why is a mental perception apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being not a valid cognizer? Well, we can say that it is not a valid cognizer because it doesn't realize form. It doesn't realize its object. If it cannot realize its object, since it cannot realize its object, if it cannot realize its object, it cannot be a valid cognizer. Now, you might wonder, why is it not realizing its object? Well, it is only a brief moment of mental perception. If it's a brief moment of mental perception, also its object, form, is also a brief moment or a subtle moment of form. Now, if that brief moment of mental perception would be realizing a subtle or a brief moment of form, it would have meant that it therefore realizes subtle impermanence. And therefore, there would be a perceptual realization of subtle impermanence existing in the mind stream of an ordinary being. And therefore, since this is not possible, not tenable, or not admissible, this mental perception apprehending form in the continuum of an ordinary being is not a valid cognizer.
That's something Trushie Islam. It's Trushie Shabu. So the as in the Mishi Trushie Shabu. The Mishi, the Mishi, Sunan, Zuchur. But the Karasna Mishi de la Pachaku Eagles. Pachaku Eagles. Michelle Pachaku Eagles. In the Mishi Pachaku led to the Yoba. Yi also did Pachaku led to make that Gilson Geshe was Kalka. And the time also the Yishi and Pachaku Eagles. Never shoot to Magazine could down. The Pajan Josie Mari Michelle almost thought that he told him any Pachaku led to Maris. Large hours. That's even the Pachaku de Matu Gilson. Kalaka was Rangi them Kazakila and Mari Pacha Nigani. No one should have saw the Pacha in and Rangi them Kazaki down over using chair. The Dukes young to be Pacha them of using currency. Bringing Manila. That's what the Tsultrim that's what the Trushie also means. In the law, in a piece and a Shijay gives. Right. This is child us.
So then, first off, we have established that a direct perception apprehending form in a continuum of an ordinary being is not a valid cognizer. The next question that arises is it a mistaken consciousness? Is it a mistaken consciousness or is it not a mistaken consciousness? Now, if we go back to the Sutra school position, the Sutra school position says that 100% definitely it is unmistaken. Mental perception in the continuum of an ordinary being apprehending form is not a mistaken consciousness. But then when we think of what would be the position of the mind-only school, is that mental perception mistaken or not mistaken? Geshe reckons that you need to take the position that it is a mistaken consciousness. It is a mistaken perception. And if you wonder, why would you take the position that it is a mistaken consciousness? Well, previously we spoke of an I consciousness which apprehends forms according to the mind-only school. According to them, the I consciousness apprehending form is a mistaken consciousness. It is a mistaken consciousness because form appears as if it is established externally to that I consciousness. And since form appears as if it is established externally, it is a mistaken consciousness. Now that occurs because the I is polluted by the imprints of ignorance. So the I consciousness, is polluted by the imprints of ignorance. And such pollution of the imprints of ignorance causes that appearance of form as if it exists externally. And therefore, the I consciousness is a mistaken consciousness. Now, if that is the case, you might then wonder, if you assert that the mental perception in the continuum of an ordinary being is not mistaken, you have to come up with a reason for saying no. Why would it not be mistaken? Why would it be different to the case of an I consciousness, which is polluted by the imprints of ignorance? So, if one generates a perceptual realization of selflessness, a perceptual realization of selflessness is not polluted by such imprints of ignorance because it perceptually realizes that the conceived object of ignorance does not exist. And since it perceptually realizes the non-existence of the conceived object of ignorance, it is not polluted by such imprints of ignorance. But then what about an ordinary being? If you say that a mental perception in the mind stream of an ordinary being is not polluted by such imprints of ignorance. And there is no reason for establishing that, for asserting that. How would you then explain that the mental perception in the mind stream of an ordinary being is not polluted by the imprints of ignorance? So we say that first off, they have a sense consciousness which has mistaken appearances of, for example, form as existing externally, and those appearances are attributed to the imprints of ignorance. Now, if we're speaking about an ordinary being, it is not necessarily the case that that ordinary being anyway has realized selflessness. So then when you think about it like that, you can't really find a reason for asserting that the mental perception in their mind stream, apprehending form, will not be polluted by the imprints of ignorance, because anyway, it doesn't have to do with selflessness at all. And therefore, it is better to then take the position that it is a mistaken consciousness. Anyway, so here when we think of what Tsultrim is saying in this text, we get to kind of think about it, go into more details, and then make such clarifications. Now let's look at an I consciousness apprehending form. So according to this presentation, an I consciousness apprehending form, well, there exists a perceptual valid cognition, which is an I consciousness apprehending form. Also, there exists a perceptual valid cognition that is an I consciousness apprehending form, right? So there are I perceptions apprehending form which are valid cognitions. So such an I consciousness is a valid cognition realizing form. So it is realizing form, but still it has mistaken appearances to dawn to it. It has the mistaken appearance of form appearing to it as if it is established externally. So it is a valid cognition realizing form, and yet it has a mistaken appearance that dawns to it, for form appears to be established externally. So why is it that form appears as if it is established externally? It appears in this way because of being tainted by the imprints of ignorance. So at a time in which an I perception sees form, it is polluted by prior conceptions, apprehending form to be an external object, or grasping at form to be established as an external object. And since there are imprints of conceptual consciousness grasping at form as if it is established externally, such imprints are polluting the appearance of form to an I consciousness apprehending form when the I consciousness sees that form.
생기 열스도 나버리는 상수를 찾아가. 지 원시리 지 이시리 슬라바는 예전 두 말. 이시이바 아니 수출을 많이 수주도 때문에 수출을 난 거. 누시온다 수지 수시 슬라마 선전을 해야. 기능이 또남 준비 시험을 어딘지야. 수지 수지 수시 슬라샤가 답되었어. 당장 담자 되고 말 담아도 근데 담자 되는 거 아니지. 밑본다 보면 담자 되고 수지 담자 찾고 쓰는 거야. 담자 시험한 거지. that digital이야. 야시야도 놓고 tempo 있으니까 sembarde jiban nanga khine devan 지금 알았어요.
지선데 남선 코너로야만 남선 니가 얘기를. 무슨 니가 얘기를 알아? So there is an appearance of form as existing as an external object to that I consciousness that sees form. Now, when we think of why would there be this mistaken appearance of form as if it is established externally, all the conditions contributing to that would also exist for a mental perception. And therefore, saying that a sense perception is mistaken and a mental perception is not mistaken just because one is a sense perception and the other is mental perception is not really going to cut it. If when you think of the conditions that contribute to such an appearance of form as if it exists perceptually, as if it exists externally. And therefore, here it is then, if you think about it in terms of this reason, you can conclude for, here the text says that for false expectations, but one might also think that it applies also to true expectations, although the text speaks about false expectations. You can therefore conclude that such a position is tenable. So a mental perception in the continuum of an ordinary being is a mistaken consciousness. So it's good then to take this position, to cement it in some sense in your mind. And Geshe is saying that because here we are not sitting in a debate court holding a certain position, which is called in Tibetan language damcha, right? So when you go to the debate court, you have those two roles. One of, a person is sitting and they're holding a position. They need to defend their position, and they also need to think of all the reasons why they would defend the position, and they need to hold it so strongly so that in the course of debate, when someone is attacking their position, they're not going to lose their damcha. They're not going to lose their position. So no, we don't do it here, but still, Geshe feels that if you take a certain position and you hold it kind of strongly in your mind, at least kind of, you cement one thing in your mind and you're able to hold it. Correct, you can. Okay. So we have such mistaken appearances that on to mental and sense perceptions. Now, if you wonder, what is the case of a self-knower? Does a self-knower has mistaken appearances? Well, mistaken appearances do not appear to a self-cognizer, because to begin with, a self-cognizer doesn't apprehend form, doesn't realize form. Self-cognizer is apprehending a subject. So we have, for example, an I consciousness apprehending form. And then we have a self-cognizer. So the self-cognizer is not realizing the form, it is realizing the subject, and I consciousness apprehending form. So to it, the subject does not appear as if it is established externally. There is no need or purpose, you could say, for a subject to appear as if it is established externally, because there are no imprints of grasping its subject as if they're external object, as if they're established as an external object. So there's no such pollution of imprint. And therefore, a self-cognizer is not a mistaken consciousness according to the mind-only school. Now, thinking of the view of the mind-only of the middle way consequence school of thought, the middle way consequence school of thought does not assert a self-cognizing consciousness, but they still say that that consciousnesses in the mind stream of sentient beings, sense consciousnesses, mental consciousnesses, have mistaken appearances because true existence appears to them. Because true existence appears to our perceptions, there are mistaken consciousnesses, according to the mind, to the middle way consequence school of thought. Now, thinking of this position of the middle way consequence school of thought, and then going back to the mind-only school of thought, the mind-only school of thought says that indeed there are appearances of true existence that don't to sense perceptions or to mental perception in the mind stream of sentient being, but there's no problem with that, because while things appear as if they're truly exist, they actually do truly exist. So this is not a mistaken appearance according to the mind-only school. But then with respect to a self-cognizer, there are no causes or conditions that contribute to a mistaken appearance that dawns to a self-cognizer, and therefore it is not a mistaken consciousness. Now, a doubt arises with respect to a yogic perception. Now, a yogic perception is said to be necessarily a non-mistaken consciousness. Now, that arises with respect to a yogic perception. So, yogic perception is said to be necessarily or pervasively non-mistaken. So then there are different types of yogic perceptions, right? So there is yogic perception, perceptually realizing subtle impermanence, perceptually realizing co-selflessness, subtle selflessness. So then if we think of yogic perception, perceptually realizing selflessness. Like, for example, perceptually realizing this, the selflessness in relation to form. This is the selflessness of phenomena in relation to form. So, since it realizes selflessness of phenomena in relation to form, then, which means that it perceptually realizes that form is not established as an external object, then there isn't any reason for appearances of form as if it is established externally to dawn to a perceptual realization of selflessness. And therefore, without there's no issue of a perceptual realization of the selfness of phenomena in relation to form, that is the yogic perception being unmistaken. There's no problem. But what about a perceptual yogic perception, perceptually realizing the subtle impermanence in relation to form? Right? It realizes subtle impermanence in relation to form. So if it perceptually realizes subtle impermanence in relation to form, well, you would think that form does appear to that yogic perception. If we then continue with the position that this yogic perception, perceptually realizing the subtle impermanence in relation to form, is unmistaken, then we need to think of why would then form not appear as if it is established externally? If it does appear to that yogic perception apprehending, and that perceptually realizes subtle impermanence in relation to form, does it have appearances of form as if it is established externally? And why would that be or not be the case?
Yeah, the Midas level, she done also to tell you. She done also matters. And it be that she that you also talk in the past, something mutual. But the Julia, and she doesn't shall pass. The Sumata also told you soon that the Pasa catching left 2 miles, catching Pasaki, lay your miles. Long, but this general love is yeah, should happen. As now, Zoo Mata almost Toyati. So let me begin. Things to conquer. So let me begin. Things to conquer towards. Things in the Turkish almost towards. Things in the Turkish number that be the Salamanza. He took that Sugan of a shadow number. She should not is Kiomanis. These are particularly Marcelano. This is love. It is love show members.
So particularly when we think about, for example, here Arya. And here Arya, realizing subtle impermanence in relation to form. Now, if it's in here, Arya, they've not necessarily realized selflessness of phenomena. This is what the mind-only school also say, right? So they have their own presentation of the 3 vehicles. One of them is the vehicle of hearers, and they say that hearers, Aryas, do not necessarily realize the selflessness of phenomena. They do not necessarily have a perceptual realization of the selflessness of phenomena. So then when we think about it, we have here Arya perceptually realizing subtle impermanence in relation to form. If they haven't realized perceptually the selflessness of phenomena, why then would it not have an appearance of form as if it is established externally, appearing to the realization of subtle impermanence of form? Why is that realization, perceptual realization of subtle impermanence of form, not affected by the imprints of grasping at the self of phenomena? So in thinking about it, Geshe is kind of taking its own position, right? So you need to kind of, you come up with those doubts, and then you need to take a direction, and you need to come up with a certain position in your mind. So the one that Geshe, the direction that Geshe is taking is when you have a perceptual realization of the of subtle impermanence in relation to form, that perceptual realization occurs due to the force of concentration, due to the strength of concentration, focusing on form. Perceptual realization, realizing subtle impermanence of form, is generated, which means that due to the force of concentration, there arises this clear appearance, which means that the appearance of form is not attributed to other things, to other factors, such as the imprint of ignorance, but it is attributed to the power of concentration, to the strength of concentration. And therefore, Geshe says that you can therefore take the position that it is not affected by the imprints of grasping itself of phenomena. So form does not appear as if it is established externally to a perceptual realization of subtle impermanence in relation to form. Now let's look at the next section that explains. Did I read through this section? Not sure. Self-knower experiencing mental direct perceiver, apprehending form in a continuum of an ordinary being, and the second moment of sense direct perceiver, apprehending form, a non-valid cognizer. Now there are 4 types of yogic perceptions. Yogic direct perceivers directly realizing subtle impermanence, those which directly realize the subtle selflessness of persons, directly realizing the co-selflessness of persons, and directly realizing the selflessness of phenomena. Now, looking at this list of perceptual realizations done by yogic perceivers, then we can see that there is a distinction between cause impermanence and subtle impermanence. There is a distinction between cause selflessness of persons and subtle selflessness of persons. But then with respect to the selflessness of phenomena, there is no such distinction. It's not that there is a cause selflessness of phenomena and a subtle selflessness of phenomena according to the mind-only school. So they only speak about the subtle selflessness of phenomena, or selflessness of phenomena in general. And the reason for that is that they do not make any distinction between a cause self of phenomena and the subtle self of phenomena, and therefore what they negate is just the self of phenomena. So we said that impermanence has cause levels and subtle levels. So for cause levels are something that are easy to see. Like, for example, in relation to a building. So you can see a building being destroyed. You can see it crumbling down. You can see it collapsing. All this is the seeing of cause impermanence. Now, with respect to subtle impermanence, with subtle impermanence, we can then think of a process of change that occurs from second to second, but also each second consists of milliseconds. So this process of change occurs in those minute amounts of time, from millisecond to the next. So this is something that we don't see. Like, for example, our body is impermanent. Our body is impermanent, and therefore it is changing from moment to moment. But we don't see that change that occurs in our body, that occurs in those really small fraction of time, milliseconds and so forth. So this is an example of subtle impermanence. So that was with respect to impermanence having cause and subtle levels. Now let's look at the selfness of person. There is a cause selfness of person, a person's emptiness of being permanent, unitary, and independent. A person being permanent, unitary, and independent is asserted by Tirthikas, which means non-Buddhist philosophers. So that's the cause selfness of persons. Now, the subtle selfness of person is what we've mentioned quite recently, as a person's emptiness of being self-sufficient, substantially existent. And then we have the selflessness of phenomena. So the selflessness of phenomena is also something that we have discussed in the last few weeks. So we have the selfness of phenomena in relation to form, as it is form not existing, or form not being established as an external object, form's emptiness of being established as an external object, and also form's emptiness of existing by way of its own characteristics is the basis adhered to by conceptual consciousness apprehending it. And form's emptiness of existing by way of its own characteristics is the basis for applying the term form. And then it says an inferential valid cognizer is necessarily conceptual. If it is an inferential cognizer with respect to a phenomenon, it is not necessarily a conception with respect to that phenomenon, because although the inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent is an inferential cognizer with respect to sound being empty of being permanent, it is not a conception with respect to that. This is so because if it is a conception with respect to a phenomenon, the aspect of that phenomenon necessarily arises, and with respect to, you can say necessarily arises or necessarily appears. And with respect to the inferential cognizer realizing sound to be impermanent, the aspect of the sound being empty of being permanent does not arise. Therefore, that inferential cognizer does not explicitly realize sound to be empty of being permanent. It realizes that implicitly when it explicitly realizes sound to be impermanent.
Number sharing, and shouldn't focus. Should number can share and shouldn't focus and what can do those songs of
지난데 tambukarandi 추디가 떡바이
shouldn't survive.
So a certain consciousness is an inferential cognizer with respect to this phenomenon, because this awareness and inferential cognizer is realizing that phenomenon using reasons. If it realizes this phenomenon using reasons, it means that a generic image appears to that awareness, and therefore it is conceptual. If there is no appearance of a generic image to that awareness, to a certain awareness, it is not a conceptual awareness.
That didn't do what Damen did. That Damen put the final form she said us. That Damen had a thing she done people in Joseph Kazak Damen she was. The tree Damen says she did, Rodos some decision to Tonica, but it changed some of that. What did us?
Now, the next section in the presentation of the mind on the school is the way of asserting selflessness. So we have had ample discussion of selflessness before, and the selflessness of person is the same as presented by schools of thought from the mind-only school and below. So, sorry, from the middle way autonomy school and below. So it says the way of positing illustrations of the cause and selflessness of persons is similar to the autonomous and below. This is what it says here. And then an illustration of the selflessness of phenomena is, for example, the emptiness that is a form and the valid cognizer apprehending that form's emptiness of being different substances. Let's look at the presentation of grounds and paths, which consists of two parts, objects of imbalance and the actual presentation of grounds and paths. Now, let's begin with the presentation of the object of imbalance according to the mind-only school. The conception of a self of person, together with its seeds and the three poisons arising due to the force of that conception, together with the seeds, are posited to be afflictive obscurations. Now, you can give rise to doubt in relation to what this statement is saying. It is stating that afflictive obscurations are posited as grasping at a self of person together with the seeds of that grasping. It doesn't say anything about the imprints of grasping at a self of person. It only speaks of grasping at a self of persons and the seeds. So what about the imprints? Are the imprints posited as afflictive obscurations? So we can take the position that in this school, the mind-only school, imprints and seeds are equivalent. After all, when we look at the explanation that is given of the imprints which are deposited on the mind-based self, the terminology that is used with respect to that, Stanton speaks about seeds which are deposited on the mind-based self, and the imprints are deposited on the mind-based self. So you can say that in this presentation, seeds and imprints are equivalent. Whereas when you look at that from the viewpoint of the middle way consequence school of thoughts, there's a difference in terms of subtlety, coarseness and subtlety with respect to seeds and imprints. Although the middle way consequence school does differentiate between them, here you can say that imprints are not specifically mentioned in this statement as being afflictive obscurations, because here they're taken to be equivalent to seeds.
Today, Denzin 7 chapters. He Pasata, he on true, natural, which should job for the Denzis language. Fishing God is Denzis language. She doesn't know to some guitar, Ranki, so as you said, but the details. Mother Delia cut the sentiment Denzin. Conscience, because then to kill it, then to kill it, then but killing it, then but to body, then it conscious the same hours. And so did that should have been to Zimbabwe, and it should doesn't remember this.
Not so indicated the negative shipjuji chedo, the local years now. Denzin said, "La now on Juba Majuba than Chila Gilesa. Chesa Chirutun Nanayan, the La Nebas, the Della Nebas, La Gresa, in a Chilajana, the Kabdila.
Community should be taught.
The La Kabdila Shawanta. Now, the next section says the conception of things as being true together with its seeds, the latencies of that conception and unmistaken dualistic appearances that arise due to the force of that are posited to be obscurations to knowledge. So this is a point that is a little bit confusing. You can contest it in a debate. After all, in the mind-only school, other part phenomena and the thought established are said to be truly established. So they do assert true establishment to true existence. So here, when it speaks about the conception of things as being true together with the seeds being considered to be obscurations to knowledge, Geshe says that the actual meaning of that is the such conceptions as forms and such as if they are established externally. So such conceptions of forms and such as being external objects, together with the seeds of such conceptions in this school of thought, are posited as cognitive obscurations.
No, that them was Zumbateria, Kanzak Danzi, Shogre, Shi Danzi, Shogas. Kanzak went to be national that they were sympathy. Chibarata. Here, when it Denzilla should do here, and you do here, and Denzi Kora should do is that should have put away the child. Then she dances, the kind of she dances.
Geshe reckons that it would have been better if this section of the text would not be using the term conception of true or grasping a true existence. It would have been better if the text would not be using the conception of things is true. Because if you think of that, if you think of the meaning of conceptions of things as true, in that they exist in a way that they appear. So the conception of things existing in a way that they appear, where they actually do not exist in the way that they appear, is regarded to be cognitive obscurations. But then, if you think about it as in that way, then you can also say that when the self of person appears, it doesn't exist in the way that it appears, and therefore that would also be an appearance of true existence, according to this explanation. So the self of persons appears, but it doesn't exist in the way that it appears. The self of phenomena appears, but it doesn't exist in the way that it appears. So with both of them, you can say that if you explain true existence or conceptions as true, as grasping things to exist in the way that they appear, then you would also have to classify it within afflictive obscurations. And therefore, it would have been better if this section in the text would not be using the term conception of things as being true together with their seeds. So rather than that, it would have been better if the text would have said the conception of the self of phenomena together with its seeds, or grasping the self of phenomena together with its seeds, the latencies of that conception and mistaken dualistic appearances that arise due to the force of that are posited to be obscurations to knowledge. The mind on the school uses the term grasping at the self of phenomena. It uses terms such as, for example, form's emptiness of existing as an external object. Form's emptiness of existing by way of its own characteristics is a basis adhered to by a conceptual consciousness apprehending it, or by as a basis for applying the term form. So it uses those terms. It does not use the term grasping a true existence. This term grasping a true existence is not found within the tenet of the mind-only school. It is found very strongly in the middle way autonomy school. So the middle way autonomy school does use the term very strongly. So it refutes true existence. It speaks about grasping a true existence as being an obscuration. You can say that the main effort that the middle way autonomy school is putting into its presentation is in refuting true existence. Now, It says that kind of things do not exist truly, even conventionally. Now, the middle way consequence school of thought also does not agree with true existence, but the main point, the main focus that it puts in the refutation is on existence by way of one's own characteristics. So, although also the midway consequence school of thought agrees with things not existing truly, still, when you look at the writings, the main effort is used in order the main effort that is put is in refuting existence by way of its own characteristics. And that is being done because while the middle way autonomy school of thought is vehement with respect to the refutation of true existence, they still said that things exist by way of their own characteristics. Things exist from their own side. Things exist inherently. And therefore, the middle way consequence school says that, yeah, things do not exist truly, but it's the same as things do not exist by way of their own characteristics, right? So there's a particular strong refutation coming from the viewpoint of the middle way consequence school of thought of existence by way of their own characteristics. So therefore, when you look at this presentation of tenets, you can see how each one of the tenets have their own terminology used in order to assert their positions and to refute certain things. Now, looking at the presentation of Jedinpoche Lama Tsongkhapa, you can see that in his presentation, he does not mix up the terms across the different schools of thought within Buddhist philosophy. So when he's explaining a certain position of a certain school, he does not use the terminology of other schools of thought, but it does not mix it up in this way. He does not mix them up in this way in his presentation of the sutra system, and he does not mix them up in this way in his presentation of Tantra or mantra. Whereas when you look at the presentation of other lamas, you can see that at times some lamas do mix up those terms. And when you look at those writings, so there's something that you can gain, kind of there's some understanding that can dawn in your mind. You can expand your mind when you look at the presentation that does mix up those terms. But then in terms of giving you a certain explanation that is easy to understand, that does not give you a lot of confusion, it's better to do it in a way that you don't really mix up those terms used by different schools of thought. So we have looked at that brief section of the Object of Imbalance. Let's look at the actual presentation of grounds and paths. And it says, those of the hero lineage conjoin the view realizing the selflessness of persons with a small accumulation of merit and for the sake of their own welfare, while those of solitary realize the lineage conjoin the view realizing the selflessness of persons with a middling accumulation of merit for the sake of their own welfare. Which means that in terms of the meditated view, the view that hears and solitary realizes meditating, and the view that hears meditating, and the view that solitary realizes meditate on is the same view. There is no difference in terms of one view being higher and another view being lower. They meditate on the same view, the selflessness of persons. The difference between them would be in terms of the extent of the accumulation.
손도 되지 토토게자 아니 토바텔라 아니 얘를 찾았어 손이 아들로지 다시 들리려고 그랬어 내가 제가 나 kalem mamu kaya jujene ya rentan chia de la be se ba de la rentan kaza mi kalem ma ja ba sa kalem ma de del pa be rentan chia chi de kalem nyu ja ba del pa be rentan chi to ani dili to chi ko do
Which means that looking at the differences between hearers and sort of realizers, the difference would be not in terms of the meditated view, but in terms of the accumulations, which means that in terms of how hard they worked in order to accomplish their goal, how much time they put into the effort of accumulating the collections, gathering the collections for attaining their own enlightenment. So a greater effort put in that was expended over a greater degree of time contributes to the middling enlightenment, whereas a smaller effort over a shorter period of time contributes to a lesser enlightenment. Which means that it's just in terms of how hard they have worked. Similar to, for example, the way that we put different efforts into what we do. So we can also see in a daily life that things which require a lot of hard work are regarded as valuable things. Like, for example, in terms of the value of a particular thing, if it is handmade, which required, something is handmade and it required effort and time, it is regarded generally as being something that is more valuable. So reading through this passage again, those of the here lineage conjoin the view realizing the selflessness of persons with a small accumulation of merit for the sake of their own welfare. While those of the solitary realizing lineage conjoin the view realizing the selflessness of persons with a middling accumulation of merit for the sake of their own welfare. And it depends on having cultivated that for at least 3 lifetimes, 100 eons, and so on, actualize their respective enlightenments. Bodhisattvas conjoin the view realizing apprehenders and apprehendeds being empty of being different substances with a great accumulation of merit for the sake of others' welfare. And it depends on having cultivated that for at least 3 countless great eons, and so on, actualize the respective enlightenment.
Sangi Papa River Teacher on the Sivan Day, Johnson, no, Ambo Omi, Sangi, Longo to courses in our part. Nambi in the future, Jujara, Cowards, Tuan, David. Tabasu, Jusu, Sinjan, Common, Jason, Common, telling you go to tell it to home.
And then it says, true Spectarians have said that when hearers and sort of realizes 4 destroyers of arhats pass beyond sorrow without remainder, the continuum of awareness is severed. So here there's a reference to true Spectarians. Now looking at tenets, we have the Sutra school tenets, the Tantrikas, the true Spectarians of the mind only, and also the Sutra followers of the middle way autonomy. Now, looking at the tenets, you can see many points which are asserted in the same way, or that bear a lot of similarities. So also here it says, true expectarians said that when hears and sort of realizes ahats pass beyond sorrow without remainder, which means nirvana without remainder, the continuum of awareness is severed. They assert that it is impossible to sever the continuum of awareness of a Buddha superior, because they assert that for the Bodhisattva who attain enlightenment initially as a complete enjoyment body in Akanishta, which means as Sambhogakaya in Akanishta, the continuum of similar type of aspect of that complete enjoyment body is not severed as long as samsara is not empty, but rather it enacts the welfare of others through various emanations in accordance with the fortunes of each individual disciple. The individual lineages of the three vehicles are definite because they assert that sentient beings since beginningless time are of three different lineages or dispositions, and thus have three different aspirations, and thus have three different ways of practicing, and thus will attain three different results. Now, one of the statements attributed to the true expectarians is that the individual lineages of the three vehicles are definite, which means that they said that there are three final vehicles. But the false expectarians do not assert that. They say that there is one vehicle. So it reads, false expectarians do not assert that when hears and sort of realizes ahas pass beyond sorrow without remainders, nirvana without remainder, the continuum of awareness is severed. They do not assert that because although they assert that at that time the continuum of mere awareness that is included in true suffering and true origins is severed, they assert that mere awareness goes on to the Buddha ground. Therefore, they assert one final vehicle. Which means that this presentation of the mind-only school is completed for us with the assertion that there is no doubt with respect to the non-severing of the awareness, right? So awareness is not severed. And therefore, finally, there is one final vehicle. And therefore, we will all attain the state of Buddha. This is how the mind-only school presentation concludes. So concluding this presentation with this statement that therefore they assert one final vehicle and therefore everyone will become Buddha is a good place to stop. And we take example from this presentation, living it like that, because it's good to conclude a session of teaching with such positive statements. Geshe from time to time listens on to teachings of Zung Rinpoche. He listens to this teaching online, and sometimes Zung Rinpoche says, in certain sessions, it's good to leave the session to conclude the session here with this positive statement, because if we do continue, it'll be difficult to find another such positive statement that will give us a point of point of, a break point in the text. So it's better to leave it here like that. This is what he says in his teachings. So when Geshe mentions Dzongrinpoche, is speaking about his previous reincarnation, not the current reincarnation. So Geshe from time to time listens to his teachings.
Because the years lost,
so now, often we ask, do you have any questions, or do you have any doubts? So it is likely that you do have questions and doubts, but let's conclude that there needs to be another time, that we'll take your questions and doubts in another time arising later on. We'll just finish it off for now. So this concludes the BP studies for 2021, which Geshe feels that although he taught it not in an excellent way, maybe in a tattered way, but Geshe said that he doesn't have good knowledge. But at the very least, we can say that we were able to continue with our study. So we were able to go ahead with the study, and we're fortunate for being able to do so. Mainly when we consider this place where we are at the moment. We come here together in this place for studying together. So, which means that we have these special circumstances, we have this special place, and we've taken special birth that make it possible for us to study the teachings of the Buddha. So in recognizing that, we also reflect upon the kindness of the teacher, the Buddha, the Bhagavan, and also the kindness of the holder of the teaching, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and of course, Geshe Lama Tsultrim. And when we say that we mindful of the kindness, we really need to feel that sense of gratitude towards the Buddha, towards His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and towards Geshe Lama Tsultrim. So then appreciating the kindness of those beings and feeling a sense of gratitude is appreciating also our, Geshe said at least on a personal level, is ability to continue with teaching or leading these classes, which is attributed solely to Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Then when Geshe says that it attributes that solely to the kindness of Captain Lama Zopa Rinpoche, it almost sounds as if, it could sound as if he's excluding a sense of gratitude to the center and so forth. But he's not doing that. It's rather than when he says that it is exclusively due to the kindness of Captain Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Geshe faced some visa problems in 2018 when the Department of Immigration have tightened up the rules for obtaining a visa. So there was this situation where we were about to lose Geshe. It was almost kind of, we almost had to leave Australia, and Captain Lama Zopa Rinpoche have done it more at that time, and they were doing pujas for Geshe's visa at Kopan and also its Selaje monastery, and it was done continuously over a period of time. So obviously Geshe kind of at the end obtained the permission to stay here with us here in Australia and continue to teach the study programs. In that sense, Geshe said that it is solely due to the kindness of Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So we then generate this heartfelt gratitude to him, and also we generate this heartfelt gratitude, remembering the kindness of other lamas. So we dedicate our roots of virtues to the great beings, which are the holders of the teachings, and use our roots of virtues, aspiring for the best of health for those great beings, the holders of the teachings, and may all their activities be successful spontaneously. But not only them, also we also need to think of the kindness with a sense of gratitude to those who are involved with putting the spiritual program together, arranging for all the different activities in the spiritual programs. We have the SPC here, Rosie, and we also have Kathy as the coordinator for the study program. So we also owe a sense of gratitude towards them. We also have other people that are involved in the running of the center, without which we would not have been able to do so. We have people from the director of the center down to even those who regularly clean this gompa. And also all the people that help us in one way or another. We owe a sense of gratitude to them because they enable us to study this study program. Also, we need to thank, in reflecting upon the kindness of the people that work in the administration of the center, those who work in the kitchen, those who work in the gardens, translator, and so forth. All of them, on the bottom of our heart, is fulfills this from his bottom of the bottom of his heart, feeling a sense of gratitude, and may we be able to continue with that in the next year as we're approaching a new year, may we be able to do so uninterruptedly also in the following year. And also, not to forget the tea makers that give us tea on Wednesday. So you're the chaiwala, right? So thank you for the chaiwala that gives us really delicious tea on Wednesday, without which Geshe said that kind of it gives that sense of mental clarity in having this excellent chai. So thank you very much for that. All right. Yodentala choto drumming and drumming gita Rinpoche rivo pa sangishin dojoyompa Mamu paye dokto kolo Rinpoche nobu Rinpoche sumo Rinpoche Lampo Rinpoche tacho Rinpoche Lampo Rinpoche Teche poye bumpa ge ma chenwa ma du ma ga meto ma dupo ma nasema chichama ni ma da wa rinpoche du chole namba gya we gya tsen usu lata mi penjong punsu tsopa ma tsanwa me pa Sanchi do bonwa di da chichen sawa tang yu pa Chebe pa den lama dan pa nam tang ke ba du yang yongi ge we shen yen chen po ge she pun su Tsultrim pa shen bo shen na ne te ba chen bo sun chu samo le ba to pe ka rangi taragi undu jin kan buwa Doje doe dundu shesu so shene da so doe magyun nam ke ta na sanchi tam che ba Doze wa chen bo go ne chingi la tu so Jo shi me to Riro Lin Shin Genpa Sanye Shin Mite Jogun Nanda Shina Choba Guzerate Chinam Kachi Thank you. Yo san chai yo me sa so yo no self tat ne you chin dam guru Kewadi Nyududa Lama Sangye Drugyune Dowa Chikya Malupa De Salagopa Sho Chanchu Semcho Rinpoche Make Pananke Yuchi Kebanyampa Me Pai Gone Gondu Pewa Sho Kanri Rawe Kowe Shinkante Pendan Dewa Malu Jumene, Chenre Siwan Tenzin Gyatso, Shape Site Badu Tengyu Chi, Tu Su Chan Shin Chan Gun Gyawe, Ten Zi Kyon Be We Kun So Do Po Se, Cho Sun Ko We Le Mon Tu Tu, Ahada So Du Je, Kon Du Sha Ten Sho. So thank you. We'll leave it here for now. So I think that there wouldn't be another exam for this module. I think that in the last couple of weeks we had a lot of debate and discussion with Geshe, and we went deeper into the material, but we haven't covered a lot of new material. So I think of just kind of we've covered in the previous exam I think most of the crucial points in the mind-only school. So we're not going to have another exam this week. So for those of you who are happy with that, there you go. Thank you very much for everyone. So we also have, on behalf of the students, some presents for Kathy and Sonia. So this is for Kathy.
I'm not going to get a microphone because it's too much hassle, but I really feel that I should be thanking all of you rather than the thanks being given to me, because really everybody here has been of such great help throughout all of these courses. I can't believe we've come to the end of another year with all sorts of restrictions, and actually it's all gone ahead so smoothly and so well, and mostly due to Sonia and the rest of you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Geshe, very much. And don't forget, we'll all be back here at the beginning of March to go on into the South Africa and Prasangika schools. Sorry. All right, that other one. The autonomous and the consequent school. I'll just keep to English. So please keep an eye on your emails and I'll send out more information about it. And should you want a printed text, let me know beforehand and I'll organize those for you. I don't do them automatically. Thank you.
And just going to thank Geshe on behalf of the Centre. Thank you so much for teaching this this module, which I know will have been an enormous benefit to everybody who's been able to attend. Thank you. Thank you to Katsu for your work in the translation.
Sorry. 이거는 뭐?
Thank you very much. Very good. It's only little from little me. Little, very sorry. But something better than nothing. But God is there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Do we have any plan of going off lunch? Let's get smashed somewhere.
Let's talk about it. Thank you so much. I think we should go out. We talked yesterday.
So,
Who would like to go for lunch somewhere together?
do you want to have lunch outside?
Yeah.
Whoever
Anybody
wants to
wanna
come.
go?
Yeah.
Where would you like to go? Geshe, where would you like to go? Indian, Thai, or Danen Yuta?
Thai.
Thai.
Okay.
Okay. Thai at Manula.
Thai,
Manila, yeah.
Manila?
All right. Thai at Manula. So now it's 10:12, but
Half an hour?
half an hour. Whoever wants to come, half an hour. Lunch at the Thai restaurant at Manula. Yeah, be there in half an hour.
Okay. See you there. Good idea.
I didn't give you one. I know. I've got, yes, she's remembered I've got my own. Very good. Well, I'm happy to drive if anybody wants to come with me. Yeah. You want to do it, you do it. Where are you?
Someone just went out the door. Yeah, someone just went out the door.
Yeah, we want to do a group photo.
A quick photo.
Don't go.
No, no, back door, someone just went. Jason, come on.
Should I stay or should I go now? Also group party.